Breaker one niner.
Breaker one niner. What?
That ranch back there was Bonnie's Clyde's
They had Clydesdales.
and Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, no, I got that part of it.
So I want to talk about the things that we have seen today. So we just saw a tank.
Llamas.
We saw llamas. Earlier I saw a barn with a door in the sky, like on the second floor, but nothing to walk out onto. I'm presuming there used to be an outdoor staircase.
Those are the highlights. But they were very eventful. Welcome to the Wandering RV Podcast, your bi-weekly source for our stories,
Our screw-ups.
and our successes living the full-time RV life. I'm your host, Kara, the Wandering RV Babe, and this is my driver, Ryan.
Breaker niner. This is Ryan on the road.
Oh, good lord. Okay, well, so where are we going today, babe?
We are headed.
Words are hard.
We are headed towards DFW.
Yes. So we just got done hanging out in East Texas. We spent Thanksgiving with our family in East Texas. So the family came down. We got there kind of Sunday, and then the family came down.
Okay, wait. I want to talk about last Sunday's getting ready to go.
Okay. All right.
Back up. Before we talk about Tyler, I want to talk about, we had been in Austin for almost 3 months, actually.
Yeah, and close to it.
And when we got ready to go, we normally wake up at we wake up at 9 o'clock. We're usually on the road by 10.
Yeah, easily we can tear down, and literally we're pulling out of the campsite within an hour.
And last week, I think you woke me up at 9 o'clock. I got up, took my shower, and we did not leave the campground until 12:15, I think?
No, it wasn't 12:15. It was not quite noon. But yeah, we were very fashionably late checking out. We just did not get our button gear that day.
I think we got our button gear, but I just think we'd been stationary for so long that I think we just, not forgot, but just were out of practice.
We were out of practice, yeah. It took a little bit of extra brain power to remember all of the things. And we even have a checklist, but it took a little extra brain power to kind of get moving and get things going. Plus, it had rained the day before, so everything was muddy and everything was dirty, so we had to take extra time to kind of clean things off before we shoved it all back in there.
Well, it rained the day before, which, yeah, that definitely made things worse. But the campground was so super sandy anyways,
yeah.
that it was, literally, there's little marmots that were popping up all over the place, and they had popped up and built a little mound over top of some of our hoses and wires and things.
Yeah.
We're literally pulling things out from under the ground almost. The pads underneath our front hydraulics were sunken in into the ground all the way down to where we had 3 pads on each side.
Yeah, 3 blocks.
3 blocks, and we took 2 out, and the last one was just in the ground, and we were almost about ready to be maybe we'll just leave these here. It was hilarious.
Oh,
it was a slow setup day for sure.
It absolutely was.
So we've just been there a long time. We've gotten kind of stationary.
Yeah.
And so then we got to Tyler, which is just beautiful. I mean, it's you're under this beautiful tree canopy.
It's kind of, anytime you picture camping, this is the kind of place that you would picture. Just lots of pine trees, really tall trees, and just kind of a beautiful little pond next to us, and very picturesque.
And I know you're asking, why go to East Texas? All of our families in DFW, why go to East Texas for Thanksgiving? Well, my family has a tradition every year of, after Thanksgiving, going to a drive-through Christmas light show.
Yeah, it's called Santaland.
Yeah, and we brought up the idea last year of, what if we did the whole week there and then we go to Santaland. And that way we can actually be camping the whole week. Obviously, we're full timers, the rest of our family aren't, but they love to camp too. And so we can all meet up and we could just do Thanksgiving camping and relaxing and enjoying ourselves. And so that's the whole reason we went to East Texas, is literally because it's an old tradition for the family of going to see the Christmas light show.
Yep, exactly. But it was really cool because we were there all week, and so we all just kind of pitched in together, and we ate all of our meals together. We planned, various different nights. We had tacos one night, we had chili one night, so like stuff that feeds a lot of people, which is great. And then we were there for Thanksgiving, and so we spent Thanksgiving there, and Ryan smoked up a turkey, which was super yummy. So yeah, and you did something really really smart with it. You actually got it from the butcher already pre kind of cut, so he was able to fit more turkey parts in the smoker at one time. So yeah, he was able to fit a turkey and a half in there and cook that up. So it was really really tasty. So Tyler was fun. But I will say, Texas is a little colder than normal. And obviously we're here because it's the holiday season and we're here to see family, and so we kind of come back through every single year. But typically, where we like to travel, we love to kind of, and we talked about this I think in last episode, we like to chase like 78 degrees. If it's warmer than 78, then I have to have a pool nearby.
Yes.
But we really like chasing kind of temperate climates and temperate weather, and so that's part of our strategy whenever we're looking for places to go. So this episode really is all about how we decide where we're going to go and what our strategy is for an entire year worth of RV camping. So we're going to dive into this. First thing we're going to talk about is how we actually plan our destinations, and then we'll get into campsites that we look for, how we plan out which campsites we're actually going to visit, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we manage change, because that's going to happen. Your plans are going to all of a sudden just blow up in your face. It's very much part of this lifestyle.
The way I like to look at our planning is I like to pick where I want to go and what I want to do first. Like, is there one specific area that I want to go to and experience, or is there some event I want to go to, whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter. I just like to look for things that I want to go to first, and then I start to kind of see how the routes kind of connect and what time of year do I want to be there. That's another big part of it. Do I want to go to this place during the summer, or do I want to go to the place during the winter or the fall, whatever. And so, like, last year, so we've been full-timing for a year now, a little over a year. And one of my big things that I wanted to do, so my sister has been living in Manhattan, New York for, oh gosh, probably 4 or 5 years now, and we have not made it up there to see her yet. Part of that, not making it up there, was obviously COVID, but we just hadn't had an opportunity to really get up there to go see her and see her place, see where she lived, check out all the cool stuff she gets to do. And so, honestly, when we started this life, one of the first things I wanted to do was get up to see my sister and go check out her home. And so, immediately on the map, as I'm planning things out, I put a pin basically on New York City, because I knew I wanted to get up to Manhattan to go see her. And so that was immediately on there. And then the second thing on there was, well, I want to be in Florida during the winter. So that was another pin on the map. And
we really wanted to go to New Orleans too.
And then I had another pin on the map just to go back to Kentucky and hit the Bourbon Trail again.
Yeah.
And then by default, we had a pin on the map back in Texas for July the 4th weekend, because we'd made those plans before we even decided to go full-timing. So that was automatically on there. And I think that formulated the first half of our year. Was essentially, I want to be in Florida during the winter. I want to make it up to New York to see my sister, but I don't want to get there too early because I don't want cold. I don't want to be cold New York. And then I want to hit Kentucky because I want to hit the Bourbon Trail, but I have to be back to Texas by July the 4th. Yeah. And so there you go. You see a plan of action of how our planning starts, and that kind of sets everything in motion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the other things that we have to consider is where we're going, and is it a touristy spot or a non-touristy spot? So we knew New York City it's not super feasible to get a big camper like ours into New York City. There is one campground that is really close by the city, but I don't believe it has full hookups. It does have a dump station, but it does not have sewer connection at the actual site, and it's pretty much just a parking lot. And so we did still want to be slightly outside of the city, so that way we could go and kind of retreat and break away from the city. And so we picked this place called Black Bear Campground in Florida, New York, which is about 2 hours away total from Manhattan. But there's a ton of train stations and subways that you can use to get into the city. So it's a pretty feasible trek in the city. But that was one of the strategies was if it's a touristy spot, one, we have to be aware that it's going to cost more when it's a touristy spot. And two, we like to look for places that are just slightly outside of that premium location so that we're still close enough we can go in and have fun and make a day of it, but we're far enough away that it's quieter and it's more peaceful while we're actually camping.
Well, especially because we ended up staying there for, I think, 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we were there for a while, so we don't want to be on a concrete parking lot for 5 weeks straight. Like, that's just not fun. It's not relaxing. It's not enjoyable. And so we still want to be out in nature. And I mean, believe me, this place is out in nature. It was
Gorgeous.
beautiful. Like,
Yeah.
it's just north of the New Jersey border.
Yeah, it was gorgeous.
And that was a big part of it. Like, literally just getting to New York was a huge part of our plan last year. And so naturally we kind of came up with some ideas to hit along the way. Even though we didn't even end up getting to all of them, as we discussed before, we ended up changing our plans a little bit. But we got from Florida to New York, and we just picked some places along the way that we wanted to stop off at.
Exactly. The other thing to think about is when you want to go. So prime season versus off season versus holidays. We found that in Florida, a lot of the places will have different pricing for the 6 months of the year where it's in season for them versus discounted pricing when it's off season. So that's another thing to just be aware of is if you're going someplace during prime season, it's going to be busier. You're going to have to set your reservations out sooner and like plan what you want to do sooner so that way you can get in. I think one of the things that we went to go do in Branson earlier this year was a super hot ticket item there and was one where if you wanted to go do it, you had to get your tickets in advance. And so we did. And then there were other things that we could just wait and get tickets the day of. So that's something else to just kind of keep in mind and something that we really look for whenever we're looking at places to go.
Yeah, and like we said, we really don't like to be in the middle of the city. We don't like to be right out of the tourist traps either. We don't mind driving a little bit of ways. And so a lot of times when I say, like I was saying earlier, we were in Austin for 3 months. We weren't actually in Austin. We were actually, I think, almost an hour outside of Austin. But for me, like, we were close enough that when we wanted to go into Austin, we could drive into Austin, but we were far enough away that we're not paying prices to stay near Austin. And it's also kind of removes a little bit of temptation to go spend too much money because when you're near some of that stuff, yeah, it just gets tempting. You're like, oh man, that would be so much fun. Let's just do that. And, it makes you have to plan things out. And so we did a couple of times. We would just take our bikes, we'd toss them in the truck, we'd go into Austin and we'd pull the bikes and we just ride around Austin. We did stuff that was fun, and then we came back and we enjoyed ourselves in Austin without having to pay the pricing that you would normally have to pay for an RV park that really is close to or inside of Austin.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into thinking about what you want to do when you get to those destinations. Like, a lot of that will determine where we want to go, how long we maybe want to spend in a place, and how we want to structure our trip there.
Yeah, so we ended up staying in New Jersey, but we went to Philadelphia. Like, that was the whole idea, was to go to Philadelphia, and we stayed in New Jersey. And when I was looking at campgrounds, kind of what I look at is I start with like, okay, what's there? What's at the center of town? Okay, and then I kind of spiral my way out, looking at different RV parks and kind of measuring like what's the quality, what's the price, and then once we get to a price that I'm happy with, like then I'm just looking at which one has the best routes to get into town because sometimes you might have one that's close by, but you've got like a weird route that you have to take that ends up being longer than if you went to a campground that was actually farther away as the crow flies, but is closer as the truck drives.
We actually found that in Chicago.
Yes.
So we were in Chicago for like one night, and we wanted to go ahead and just go in and just eat dinner in Chicago, which we did, was super fun. But there's not any campgrounds really close by Chicago, and so that became a factor in terms of how do we get close enough to Chicago for this like one night layover essentially, where it's a feasible enough trip for us to go ahead and unhitch, take the truck in, drive, eat dinner, and then come back. And it ended up being at a place that was further away in miles from the city, but closer in terms of driving distance from the city than two or three others that we were looking at.
Yeah, so it was like this one major road that went into Chicago, and we were directly off of the major road, but then there were some other campgrounds that were closer, but you had to take a back road to the same major road that we were going to be taking in anyways. Yeah. And so it's definitely a part of the planning, and you're always thinking about these things. And so like next year, there's a big event going on that I'm planning our next year's trip around, and that's the whole point, is to get us to that event when it happens, and we have a big list of places that we want to go to, and some of them we can go ahead and check off the list. Some of them we can't. Like we want to go back. We saw so many cool things that we want to go back, so you can't really even check them off the list. And that's the greatest part about this life, is that you get to just go explore and see things that you might not have ever seen. And one of my favorite things is just because we stay as long as we do, you get to immerse yourself sometimes. I don't know if we've mentioned this on the podcast before, but we've talked about it. Like, there's so frequently we don't get mistaken for tourists. We get mistaken for locals because you're there long enough. I mean, it really only takes a couple of weeks, but most people don't stay in a new area for a couple of weeks unless they're doing it for business. So it doesn't take long for you to just feel like you know where you're at, where you're going, and not really need to use GPS just to go to the grocery store even. Like, it doesn't take long to feel localized to what's going on in the culture and just kind of the fun things everybody's got going on. Now, obviously, it's a little different when you go to a place like Branson or New Orleans where everybody's tourist.
Well, yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there are definitely people who live in New Orleans, and honestly, I don't blame them, because that would be a cool place to live. But it's also a lot of tourists, and so it's very easy if you go to a touristy area that you're going to spot the tourists. When we went to Philly, we were going to the American Revolution Museum. Obviously, you're doing the touristy things, but we also just wanted to experience. So we just walked into a local bar, and they told us about some cool things to do, and it's just great.
That's a great tip. That is one thing that I would highly suggest, is when you get someplace, have a few things planned out. Certainly things where you have to get reservations in advance. You absolutely want to do that just to maximize your time there. But stop at a local place to eat the first night you're there and ask the locals where they go. Ask the locals what the cool things to do are, or where the great places to eat are, and you're going to find these hidden gems in any place that you go that's going to be amazing, or at least going to make for a fun story.
Yeah, I think we figured it out when we were in Fredericksburg. It was like the last week we were in Fredericksburg last year, and we were walking around the campground, and we were just talking to a couple of people who'd been there for a little while. Some of them
were long-termers.
Yeah, they were long-termers for sure. I don't know how long all of them been there, but we were talking to them and just kind of realized, like, these guys have some great advice. And so we ended up going to one restaurant there that was really, really good, that was just a recommendation from somebody when we were just walking around the campground.
So let's move into where we actually choose to camp at and set up, because there's so many options and there's so many different ways that you could do it at completely different price points. And so I think it's helpful to talk about our strategy, the things that we look for, the amenities that we look for, and some of the ways that we plan reservations just to make sure that, our reservation is solid and that we're going to have a spot that we know what we're going to have whenever we get there.
I'm going to use some random numbers and some specifics just because, like, cost for different people means different things. And so I'm going to preface this whole conversation. Anytime we reference a cost and what we think is reasonable for a campground, that's based off of what we want to spend in our budget and how we want to spend our money. Other people may feel very differently, especially if you're not a full timer. It's really easy to, like, if you're going on a vacation with your RV, it's so much cheaper to stay at any campground than any hotel anyways, that the cost of a nicer RV park is not necessarily going to bother you the same way it's going to bother me to spend too much money just for a few luxuries, especially luxuries that I don't end up even needing. So,
well, and it may not. Maybe you want to spend all of your money on the things that you want to do there, and you want to camp as cheap as possible on your vacation, and that could be a strategy as well.
Yeah, and so my biggest thing is, if we are there for more than one night, I want full hookups. I want my 50 amp, I want my sewer, and obviously I want my water. Like, that is mandatory. How I pick a campground other than full hookups is really based off of price.
And if they can handle big rigs.
Right. I guess I should say that. For us, because of the size of our rig, that is always a question that I have to ask. We'll talk about this a little bit later, one of the programs that we use to help kind of filter some of that out. But once you've decided, you still have to call and verify, like, they can actually handle your big rig, because them just listing that they can handle big rigs is not always great. Some of them actually do have on their website what sizes they can handle, and that's really great when they do that. And I really appreciate every campground that lists that on their site. Honestly, like, my suggestion, if you run a campground, put maximum size links per site on your map. That would be so helpful, because then you can actually look at the sites and say, yes, that one is big enough for me. That's the spot I want. I've seen a few campgrounds that do it. So first one on the list needs to fit us. Usually we filter those out pretty quickly. Then full hookups. Again, we filter those out pretty quickly. And then third is price. And price is not a static thing, because prices can change because of the seasons. Prices also sometimes have benefits or discounts the longer you stay. And so depending on how long we're staying, we want to make sure that we're getting the best rate. Obviously, we mentioned a couple of episodes ago, different discount programs, which again affect price. So all of that goes into, so you may go to a website, may say that it's $45 or $65 a night, which is too much in my book per night. But after discounts or after weekly or monthly rates, maybe it's actually reasonable. And sometimes those are listed on the website. Sometimes you got to call. Sometimes, like some of the discount programs, you actually have to go through their website to figure out what the discount is and what price it's going to be.
Another thing that's really important to us, because we do this full time and we work from home full time, is we also look for places as best as we can that we are confident is going to have a good internet connection of some kind. We have multiple internet services just to ensure that no matter where we go, chances are there's going to be one that's going to work for us. But that's another thing that we look for. And so we don't generally look for places that are way, way, way off the beaten path, or sometimes in like a state park or a national park where internet might be truly spotty in those areas, or really, really close to mountainous areas where, again, internet is likely to be spotty. And there's some different options and different research that you can do where people will put in information about campgrounds as part of their reviews that's fairly crowdsourced, and they'll tell you which internet solutions worked for them while they were there. That may not be a concern for you. If you're going on vacation, you don't care, you're like, hey, I'm off of work, I'm not going to log onto the computer once while I'm here, that's amazing, and you're not going to have that limitation. But for us, we definitely look for places where we are fairly certain we'll have decent coverage.
Yeah, it's kind of a cat and mouse game. Like, you don't want to be near the city, but you do want to be near an interstate.
Yeah.
Like, that really makes the big difference, because internet is always better near an interstate. It just is. Like, today we're not actually driving on the interstate. We're driving on, it's a major road, but it's not an interstate. And we actually had some issues before we started recording where Kara couldn't pull up.
I couldn't pull up the dock
Couldn't
because it
pull-
was in Dropbox.
Yeah, the dock was in Dropbox, and we had what looked like good signal, but we weren't getting enough internet for her to even be able to download that. So lesson learned, pre-download the dock.
Yeah.
But in my experience, as long as you're near an interstate, you're usually going to be okay. Obviously, we have Starlink, which is not location dependent, but it is dependent on how many trees there are. And so, and a lot of campgrounds do like to have trees. Like where we were in Tyler had a ton of trees. So it's not really great for Starlink. But it's a little ways away from the interstate, so you get a little bit of internet, but it's not great. But we were on vacation, so it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, we wanted to be out in nature and away from everything. So for us, for that week, didn't matter.
Right. But other times we want to make sure the interstate is within spitting distance, because that usually means you're going to have good cell service.
Yeah. Some other things that you might want to look for, and for us, sometimes it is and isn't important, but there's other amenities that you might want to look for. There are campgrounds that will have full bathhouses with nice showers and bathrooms and things like that. They'll have laundry facilities. None of those things are typically things that we need, so we don't really care about those things, but it's nice to have them as a backup.
Actually, pro tip, don't actually look for laundromats to be at the campground. Laundromats inside of a campground charge more than the laundromats outside the campgrounds. Try to find a laundromat nearby because it's usually cheaper than it is inside the campground.
That makes sense. The only other amenity that two amenities I think that we really like to see in campgrounds is if the weather is nice and warm, we really love to have a pool nearby. And so we appreciate that. We'll sometimes pick a place that has a pool versus one that is close by that doesn't have a pool if the weather's nice enough that we might want to go take a dip. The other thing that we really like is trails, specifically biking trails and paths like that. So there's a lot of campgrounds that will actually have biking and walking trails and hiking trails either within the grounds of the campground or really, really close by. And those are always really nice as well because that's a free thing that you can go do. You just step outside and you start walking or you start riding, which is really nice. So a couple of tips around reservations at campgrounds, because we talked a little bit about this, but we didn't go into detail on it. But keep in mind, every campground is different. It is individually owned. It is individually operated for the most part. You're not going to have a ton of consistency unless you go to a chain like KOAs or things like that. You're not going to have consistency in the reservation process. And so there's a couple of tips that we have in terms of getting a reservation. And the first one has to do with pay. You need to make sure that you have enough money for the reservation that you want to set, because some campgrounds will ask for your entire reservation up front, and some of them will only want a deposit, and then some of them are like, cool, we got you, you're good, pay when you get here. So that's something that you just need to keep in mind, depending on how long your trip is and where you want to go.
Cancellation policies are another big part, because some have cancellation policies like, all you got to do is let us know 24 hours in advance and we'll give you your money back. Some are, let us know 24 hours in advance and you get a credit with us for any future stays. And then some of them are, you got to cancel 2 weeks in advance, or you got to let us know. And some of them, even interestingly enough, have different cancellation policies based off of how long you're going to stay there. If you're staying there for a night, it's a different cancellation policy, or a week is different than if you're staying there for a monthly. And so there's a lot that goes into the cancellation. And so when you're kind of planning and calling and setting the reservations, you also kind of need to know what the cancellation policies are and whether or not your plans are finalized yet, because it may be better just to wait a little bit longer to make sure that your plans are truly as solid as you want them to be, versus sometimes for us, we can make some reservations and know that there's a chance if something changes, it's okay. It's not a big deal, especially because I'm planning stuff a year out in advance, whereas you may be planning things that are only a couple months away, may not be as big of a deal. But I think when we made our change, I think we talked about a few episodes ago about going straight from Atlanta to Philadelphia instead of stopping off. The place that we had the reservation with, I canceled it, and within the cancellation policy, but their policy was you get credit. And I was like, well, we're not going to be back through for a couple of years. And she was like, oh, well, unfortunately, our credits are only good for up to 12 months. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you have to kind of keep in mind as well, not just with cancellation policies, but just with when you reserve your actual stay, is kind of going back to our earlier point about whether it's in season or off season and whether it's a tourist place or non tourist place. If it's going to be a higher demand or holiday weekend or something like that, schedule your reservation out further in advance. If it's not an area where it draws a lot of people in or it's off season, you could potentially wait till the day of to get your reservation. We've actually talked to some RVers that are full timers and they literally make no reservations at all in advance. They just make it the day of, they drive for however long they want to, and then they find a place to stop. So it depends on how you want to navigate that and where you want to go. But those are things to keep in mind as well, is there are certain places where you really do need to make reservations out up to a year in advance versus others where you can just drop in the day of. And then on top of that, there are some campgrounds where they won't accept reservations out too far in advance. And so it's all about just calling and finding out the information. And I would say, as just an extra tip, a lot of campgrounds do now have websites, and that's helpful. But to Ryan's earlier point, they don't always list all of their information on their website. And so you really do have to call to get the information that you need.
Slug bug.
Oh, you got me. Oh, that's a convertible one, too. Nice. The other thing is pets. So a lot of campgrounds will have restrictions on certain breeds or certain weights of pets or the number of pets. And so you need to keep that in mind if you want to bring your fur babies with you. And some of them will ask for vaccination records as well. So you need to make sure that you've kept up with all of those vaccinations with your fur babies if you want to bring them on the road with you.
Yeah, and don't stay at a campground that has a restriction of 20 pounds or under for dogs, because those dogs are just the yappiest dogs in the world.
We've only run into that one time.
I know.
Yeah, I was like, no way.
20 pounds? Those are the most annoying dogs.
Our little girl, she is on the edge of 50 pounds ish, which is kind of teetering right there on the edge of some requirements for campgrounds. And so we sometimes have to sweet talk them and make sure that they know that she's the sweetest girl in the entire world to be able to get in. But yeah, we definitely could not have passed her for a 20-pound dog.
I just throw on a little bit of Southern charm and tell them how cute and lovable she is, and they usually soften up pretty quickly, because she's probably closer to 55 than 50, but she's close enough, and she is so obedient.
So let's talk about managing change, because that happens all the time. It's either your plans change and all of a sudden you have to just shuffle your reservations around. There's been a couple of different times where we were actually getting ready to leave and we found out, the wind was going to be too high for us to be able to travel that day, or it was going to be way too rainy for us to travel that day. So we ended up having to call the current campsite that we were at and ask them if we could stay an extra day, and then call the campsite we were heading to and let them know we weren't going to make it in that day.
Yeah, that happened when we were leaving Branson, actually. There was going to be some inclement weather, and if y'all listen to the discount episode, the reason we were in Branson is we got a couple of free nights when we bought our RV that we needed to use. So they actually weren't able to let us stay an additional day, and the way they're...
Say a command.
No, Garmin, no. What was I talking about? Garmin was distracting me. So they weren't actually allowed to let us stay because of how their membership thing was set up, and which was fine, not a big deal, but we really didn't want to travel on that day because, it was bad. It was really, really windy and really, really heavy rain. And so we wanted to not have to travel on that day, and luckily, I don't think you were working the next day, so we called around and just found a campground just maybe 50 minutes to an hour away.
I think it was less than that. Yeah.
It might have been. And we stayed there for one night. And luckily, they were able to get us in. And I was talking to the office lady, and she was commenting. She's like, I wouldn't have wanted to travel today. So, yeah, you're good. You can stay with us for a night. And it was awesome. I told her, I didn't know if the weather was going to be bad the next day or not. But I just asked her, what when we needed to be out by, and she's like, take your time, no big deal. Like if it's raining in the morning, don't worry about it. So it was really, really cool, and she was really, really great.
Yeah, she was super sweet, super accommodating.
I mean, she told me where the pool was, and I was like, well, I appreciate it. I don't think I need a pool tonight.
Yeah. Well, but that happened to us in Fredericksburg as well. So we were planning on leaving Fredericksburg a day sooner, and the day that we were going to leave Fredericksburg, the wind gusts were 50 miles an hour. And so we know as tall and as big as our rig is, that is extremely unsafe, and especially if it's a crosswind. And we didn't want to get caught out on the road and potentially have issues with severe wind. And so we ended up calling in at that time. They actually were able to accommodate us one more night. And so we just stayed the extra night and then left the next day. But that kind of stuff happens all the time. And so those are two examples of where sometimes you just have to be ready to pivot. And it kind of goes back pivot, 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 if you remember that from Friends. But sometimes you just have to be ready for that change, and you kind of just have to call and ask if people can accommodate last-minute reservations. You will generally be able to find something. It just might not be as ideal as you would like for it to be, but a lot of times state parks will have last-minute reservations available. KOAs almost always have last-minute reservations available. Boondockers Welcome is another great one to go to, or Harvest Host will have last-minute reservations. And then if all else fails, you can pretty much always find a Cracker Barrel that will let you stay overnight and just boondock overnight. So
Actually, Cracker Barrel, I don't think it allows that anymore.
yeah, they do.
Okay.
Walmart doesn't.
That's what it was. Walmart doesn't allow that anymore. That
Yeah, Cracker Barrels do. Walmarts don't. You have to call the individual Walmart and ask the manager who's on shift if you can stay in the parking lot overnight. But yeah, so there's ways that you can find to navigate the change, but you have to plan for your plans to change with this kind of a lifestyle because of the nature of how transient and how nomadic it is. So you mentioned earlier, because Ryan's the one who schedules 90% of our reservations. I typically will only jump in when there is a change, and sometimes that's while we're on the road. But most of the time, you're the one who's scheduling our reservations, and you use a particular app to help you do that. And I love that you use this because there's others out there, but we use this particular one, and we found it to be just really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's called RV Parky. It's a website slash app, and it's got. We may have even mentioned it in a past episode. I don't know, but the reason I wanted to bring it up this week was because it kind of helps in the planning methodology of how I schedule things out. So you could put dates and spots. You can put in a specific city. You can put in a specific campground. You can kind of schedule things out however you want to. So it's almost it's a scheduler, but it also has some RV park reviews, and it also like just has listings and what this is all user sourced, but it also has what resources are available at the campground. So one of the filters you can put on is big rig access, which doesn't technically qualify for us, but it's usually a good kind of idea to know whether or not it's going to be easy to get in and out of the campground. You can also filter by sewer, water, electric hookups, whether it's got 30 amp or 50 amp hookup, and pet friendly, all those things. It's got a ton of filters on there. And so when you pick a spot, so example, we were talking about going to Atlanta, Georgia. I initially, as I'm planning the year out, I put in the places we're going. So Atlanta, Georgia, North Carolina, Philadelphia, New York. And that's kind of our trip from Florida up to see my sister. I put the city first. So I put Atlanta because I knew we wanted to be near Atlanta. I put Philadelphia because knew we wanted to be near Philadelphia. But I put North Carolina because I didn't really necessarily know where in North Carolina I wanted to be yet. And so I could make the plan for the area of the country that I wanted to be in without necessarily knowing exactly even what city and definitely not what campground yet I wanted to stay at. And then once I decide the city, or maybe I don't. Maybe I just want to be near a specific interstate. So I want to be in North Carolina near I-95. That's easy enough. And so I start looking, and what I can do is I can filter an RV Parky down to the campgrounds that have the amenities and features that I want and need. And then I can start clicking on each one and reading some user reviews, going to their website, seeing what their pricing is. What I will say is the pricing on RV Parky is not super accurate, unfortunately, because pricing for RV parks has been going up, and so some of that user generated information is a little old. You're just better off looking on the website. Don't trust RV Parky for pricing. But it usually does also tell you what discount programs they're a part of, which something that not all campgrounds put on their website. But this again, because it's user generated, a user, if they went there and they were able to use this discount, they can go into RV Parky and say, yeah, I was able to use my Good Sam or my whatever. I don't can't think of any others off the top of my head, but I used
Passport America.
Passport America, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of get all that information, and you can see visually what the distance is from anything you want to do. So if there's something specific you want to do in that city, then you can look at that exact location and say, oh, well, it's better for us to be on the east side of town or the west side of town. And again, like we talked about, we like to stay outside of the town. We don't want to be directly in the city. And so it is actually kind of important which side of the town you're potentially on.
Yeah.
So that way, when you drive in, you're getting close to where you want to go.
Yeah, the other thing, you touched on it just a second ago, but the nice thing is it will also help you plot out your route as well. And it'll tell you the mileage between each of your stops. So that way you can kind of get an idea of where you should stop along the way to make sure that you don't just kill yourself with too long of a travel day. So it's a really nice way to just kind of plan out your entire year of travel, and then you can always add pinpoints in between to, filter in kind of all your in-between stuff that you do along the way. So, as always, we have a fan question every single episode. This one, I think, tracks along with what we were talking about, but we got this question earlier this week from actually a coworker of mine, and they asked, how long do we typically stay at a location before moving on? We kind of touched on it earlier in the episode, but let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think it all depends, really, honestly, for us. What are we wanting to do? What's our purpose for being there? We pick locations based off of what we want to do. So I want to go to New York to see my sister, or I want to go to Fredericksburg to drink some wine. I want to go to New Orleans to experience Bourbon Street. And so I look at that and I'm like, okay, how many days do we need to experience what we want to experience? And the answer usually is a couple of days. Well, we work Monday through Friday, so a couple of days is one weekend.
Which is automatically now 2 weeks. One weekend to travel, 1 weekend to play, 1 weekend to travel.
Yeah, and so 2 weeks is kind of the bare minimum if we actually want to do anything. That's the starting point. We stayed in Fredericksburg for only 2 weeks. Same with New Orleans, partially because it was just expensive, and partially because we really just wanted to, go experience Bourbon Street for a little bit, knowing we'd probably come back at a later date anyways. And our real goal was to get to Florida so we could winter in Florida.
Yeah, we like to stay in places long enough to get to know the area. And generally, because of our work schedule, that equates to anywhere between 3 and 4 weeks on average that we would target staying in a particular area.
Yeah, and if we really want to be somewhere for a long time, obviously we're going to stay there longer. We stayed in Austin for 3 months this year. It's actually more of a cost savings measure. Diesel prices obviously went through the roof the first part of the year, and so we wanted to be a little cautious. And being near Austin, Texas is actually a lot of fun. There's a lot of things to do in Austin, but there's also, the campground had, a really, really cool community to hang out with and have fun. They had plans for Halloween. They had plans almost every weekend, so it worked out really well. It was a cost savings measure, but it was also a ton of fun.
Yeah.
And so it was really relaxing and really enjoyable to not be going every couple of weeks. I love going every couple of weeks. I really do. And honestly, the week leading up to us leaving there, I was itching. I was ready to go.
I was so excited.
I was like,
let's do it. Not that I didn't love where we were at and didn't have a good time, but I was like, I'm ready to be on the road again.
I know. I was just so excited to finally be traveling and getting to go to Tyler. And then we're going to go back to DFW for a little bit. We'll be stationary for a couple of weeks, but really not long. I think it's only 3 weeks, just enough for the holidays. It's just, you want to stay somewhere long enough that for us at least. We want to stay somewhere long enough that it's fun and engaging and we get to enjoy ourselves. But there is a point where you start to get the itch again and you want to be on the road. You just want to go.
Exactly. Well, hopefully this was helpful and gave you a little insight into our strategy for how we pick places that not only we go and visit, but also where we camp at. But thanks for listening, and we'd love to stay connected to you. Follow us on Instagram at WanderingRVBabe, or email us a question or a travel idea or a comment at podcast@wanderingrvbabe.com. And we'll see you next time.
For sure.
For sure.
So today's very much a travel day. It's like right after Thanksgiving, everybody's heading home. Like there's lots of cars. We've seen a ton of RVs out on the road. But I swear everyone is looking at us as we're driving through the city because I guess we're the only ones driving in this exact spot. Even though we've seen a ton on the road along the way, but right now as we circle around the city going on the loop, I feel like we're
We are the sideshow attraction.
I feel like every car, every head just turns and just stares.
I agree. This is so weird. I don't feel like I've experienced this yet.